My name is Clara Thompson. For as long as I can remember, my world has been one of quiet observation, rendered in fine lines and soft watercolors. I'm an architectural illustrator, a profession that suits my temperament perfectly. I find solace in the geometry of a well-placed window, the silent history in a weathered brick facade, the gentle curve of a wrought iron gate. My life, until recently, felt much like one of my drawings, carefully composed, serene, and built on what I believe to be a solid, unshakable foundation. That foundation was my life in Auden Bay, a city of salt-laced air and old stone, where I lived with my husband, Ethan, in a heritage house on Hemlock Lane. We'd bought the house as a near ruin, a forgotten gem with good bones and a soul that whispered of past lives. Over 5 years, we had poured our love, our weekends, and what little savings we had into its restoration. Ethan, a corporate lawyer with a mind as sharp and structured as the skyscrapers his firm represented, handled the budgets and contractors. I handled the heart of it, the color palettes, the textures, the way the morning light would fall across the reclaimed maple floors. It was our shared masterpiece, a testament to our partnership. The other pillar of my life was my younger sister, Isabel. She was the vibrant, brilliant splash of oil paint to my muted watercolor. A director at a prestigious downtown art gallery, she moved through the world with an effortless glamour that had always both captivated and slightly intimidated me. Where I saw beauty in quiet corners, Isabel saw it on a grand stage, under the brilliant glare of gallery lights. We were different, yes, but I believed our differences were complementary, the way the intricate detail of a drawing is enhanced by a bold, elegant frame. I was the quiet homebody, she was the dazzling socialite, and Ethan, I thought, was the bridge who admired us both. I was 34 years old, content in the life I had so meticulously helped to build. I believed in the strength of my marriage, the bond of my sisterhood, and the peaceful, predictable rhythm of my days. I was wrong about all of it. The mahogany door was slightly ajar, just 3 inches of space between my world before and my world after. Not the door to a law office, but the door to our study, the room on Hemlock Lane where the afternoon sun slanted in, illuminating the dust motes dancing like tiny, fleeting stars. This was the room where I sketched, where Ethan prepped for his cases, the quiet heart of our home. I'd come home a day early from a work trip to surprise him, my suitcase still by the front door, a bottle of his favorite Pinot Noir cooling in the fridge. Through that gap, I could hear the soft murmur of voices, his voice, warm and intimate in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in months. I pushed the door open wider, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. And there she was, my sister Isabel, her sleek, dark hair cascading over Ethan's shoulder as she straddled his lap in the worn leather armchair we'd found at a flea market. Their mouths were locked together, not with the desperate hunger of new lovers, but with the lazy, confident familiarity of a long-established ritual. Her hand, adorned with a single, elegant silver ring, rested on his chest, right over his heart. His hands were on her waist, holding her with a sense of placid ownership. They didn't hear me enter. They were too lost in their quiet world to notice the woman who had been married to one of them for 5 years, who had shared a childhood with the other for 32. I stood there, rooted to the spot, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked, each second a heavy stone dropping into the well of my disbelief. Then Isabel opened her eyes and saw me over Ethan's shoulder. She didn't gasp. She didn't scramble away. A flicker of something annoyance? Inconvenience crossed her face before it settled into a mask of calm composure. She smiled, a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Clara," she said, her voice smooth as river stone. She slid off his lap, not in a hurry, but with a deliberate grace, straightening the silk of her blouse. "You're home early." Early. As if I'd stumbled into a private meeting I wasn't meant to attend. Ethan stood up, adjusting his tie with practiced calm, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times before he walked into a courtroom. His blue eyes, the ones that once held a universe of affection for me, met mine. There was no guilt in them, no panic. There was only a weary resignation, as if I were a complication he had anticipated but hoped to avoid. We should talk, he said, his voice level. Talk. The word was a dry whisper, a stranger in my throat. My gaze drifted around the room, my sketches pinned to the corkboard, his law books lining the shelves, the faint scent of turpentine and old paper. Our life. About what, Ethan? About how long this has been going on. About how many times you've done this in our house. In my chair. Clara, please, Isabel's voice cut in, laced with that familiar tone of gentle condescension she used when she felt I was being overly emotional. Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. More difficult than it needs to be. The phrase hung in the air, obscene in its simplicity. I looked from her perfectly composed face to his impassive one. They were a set, a matched pair. I was the discordant element, the one who didn't belong. How long? I asked, the question clawing its way out of the numbness. They exchanged a look. It wasn't furtive or guilty. It was the seamless, shorthand communication of two people who knew each other's thoughts. It was a look that told me I had been on the outside for a very, very long time. About a year, Ethan said finally, his voice devoid of inflection. A year. Since my last birthday. The party where Isabel had given a charming, witty toast to my favorite sister and her brilliant husband. The period during which I had worried about Ethan's stress at work, leaving him quiet notes of encouragement, making his favorite meals, believing I was supporting him through a difficult time. I had been a nurse tending to a patient who was never actually sick. A year, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. Look, Clara, Isabel said, perching on the edge of the desk as if she were about to begin a lecture. I know this is a shock. But if we're all being honest with ourselves, you and Ethan have been drifting apart for ages. Everyone could see it. Our marriage was already over in practice, if not in name, Ethan added, his lawyerly voice cool and measured. This just clarified things. The audacity of it stole my breath. They stood there, the two people I trusted most in the world, performing a post-mortem on my marriage while I was still living in it. There were no apologies, no stammered explanations, just a clinical assessment of my failure, delivered with the calm indifference of a doctor discussing a terminal diagnosis. A strange, cold clarity began to cut through the fog of shock. I want you out of the house, I said to Ethan, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. He actually let out a small, weary sigh, as if I were a child being unreasonable. Clara, let's be realistic. This is my house. My name is on the deed, my income pays the mortgage. If anyone is leaving, it will be you. And where would I go? The question was practical, desperate. Isabel and Ethan exchanged that look again. Actually, Isabel said, her voice softening into a tone of feigned concern, I've been thinking about that. Mom's been so lonely since Dad passed. Maybe this is a good opportunity for you to move back home for a while. You could help her out, have some time to figure things out. Move back home. At 34, after building a life, a career, a home, they were suggesting I retreat to my teenage bedroom, a failure sent back for reprocessing. Does Mom know? The question was a betrayal in itself, but I had to ask. Isabel's smile was pitying. I spoke with her last week. She understands. She's always said that you and Ethan were on different paths. She paused, choosing her words with a surgeon's precision. She thinks we make more sense. She said it's about time Ethan had a partner who could truly challenge him, who operates on his level. The walls of the study seemed to warp and bend. Not only had they been carrying on this affair, but they had brought my own mother into their conspiracy. They had already planned my exile, already redrawn the family portrait with me sketched out of the frame. I looked at Ethan, the man I had supported through late-night study sessions in law school, the man who had wept on our wedding day and promised me a lifetime. He was glancing at his watch. I need some air, I managed, turning to leave the room that was no longer mine. Clara, wait, Ethan called after me. We need to discuss the practicalities. The divorce, the division of assets. Assets? I turned back, a humorless laugh escaping my lips. What assets, Ethan? You made sure everything was in your name. For tax purposes, you said. For simplicity. He had the grace to look momentarily uncomfortable. Yes, well, we can work something out. I'm not an unreasonable man. Unreasonable. The man who had been sleeping with my sister for a year, in our home, was worried about being perceived as unreasonable. I walked out of the study, past my suitcase in the hall, and out the front door into the crisp autumn air. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew that the life I had so carefully illustrated had been erased, and I had no idea how to draw a new one. The first few days were a blur of hollowed-out hours spent in a sterile downtown hotel room. The view was of other people's lives playing out in the windows of the office building across the street. I called my mother, hoping for a lifeline, an anchor in the storm. "Clara, honey," her voice was gentle, but cautious. "Isabel told me you might be calling. She said things got difficult." "She told you everything?" "She told me enough, dear." "Oh, sweetheart, I know this is hard, but sometimes these things happen for a reason. Ethan and Isabel, they just fit. They're both so driven, so ambitious." "I'm ambitious," I said, my voice thin. "I have my own business." "Of course you do, honey. And your drawings are lovely. But let's be honest, it's not the same world. Isabel understands the pressures Ethan is under, his career goals. You've always been quieter, softer. Maybe this is just a natural course of things. Natural selection." My mother was discussing my marriage as if it were a David Attenborough documentary. "So you're on her side." "There are no sides, Clara. I'm just being realistic. You and Ethan were having problems. And Isabel, well, she didn't plan for this to happen. Love is complicated. Love." They were cloaking this calculated betrayal in the noble language of love. "Where am I supposed to live, Mom?" "Well, you know your old room is always here for you. And, honestly, it would be a big help to me. This house is getting to be too much on my own." There it was. My consolation prize. After my husband and sister dismantled my life, I could return to my childhood home and become my mother's companion and caretaker. A gentle, quiet life, just as they'd all decided I was suited for. "I need to think," I said, my throat tight. "Of course, dear. Take all the time you need." "But Clara," she added, her voice dropping, "try not to make a scene. For the family's sake." For the family's sake. Not for my sake. For the sake of the new family they were constructing on the ruins of my own. I hung up and stared out the hotel window. Below, the city hummed with purpose. People were heading to meetings, to dinner, to homes that were still their own. For the first time, the shock began to recede, replaced by a slow, cold burn. It wasn't the fiery rage I might have expected. It was something colder, clearer. It was the feeling of a chisel hitting stone. Ethan and I met a week later in a sterile conference room at his firm, Sterling and Croft. He had his lawyer with him. I was alone. He slid a folder across the polished table. "I've had this drawn up," he said, avoiding my eyes. "It's a fair settlement offer. Given the short duration of the marriage and the fact that most assets are premarital or tied to my business, I'm prepared to be generous." I opened the folder. The offer was for $50,000. Enough to rent a small apartment for a year to keep me from being destitute, but not enough to truly start over. It was a dismissal fee. $50,000? I said, looking up at him. "And I'll cover your moving expenses," he added, as if this were a magnanimous concession. "It's more than a court would award you, Clara. My lawyer assures me of that." "Considering what?" I asked quietly. "Considering you systematically destroyed our marriage and conspired with my sister behind my back for a year?" "Clara, I understand you're hurt," he began, his voice taking on a patient, patronizing tone. "Hurt?" I stood up, feeling a strange new strength in my limbs. "Hurt is a paper cut, Ethan. This is demolition. This is the calculated leveling of a life I thought was real. A life you told me was real. Look, these things happen. People change. What Isabel and I have, it's a partnership of equals. It's something I never had with you." The terrible thing was, a small part of me understood what he meant. We had become comfortable. I had found my contentment in our quiet life, while he had still been striving, climbing. But I thought that was the balance of a marriage, not a reason for its dissolution. "So this gives you the right to cheat?" "I didn't plan this. It just evolved." "For a year, it just evolved," I repeated, the words flat. "Please, don't make this more difficult than it has to be," he said, that now familiar refrain. I looked at the folder, at the neat, typed numbers that were meant to quantify the value of my 5 years of marriage, of the home I had poured my soul into. I closed it. "When do you want me out of the house?" I asked. He looked visibly relieved. "The end of the month. That gives you 2 weeks to find a place and move your things." 2 weeks. To dismantle a home, to pack up the remnants of a life. "Fine," I said. "Good." He almost smiled. "I'm glad we can handle this like adults." That night, back in the silence of my hotel room, I sat at the small desk with my laptop. I've always been a researcher. It's what makes me good at my job. Before I put pen to paper, I study blueprints, read historical documents, walk the grounds. I understand the structure before I begin to illustrate it. Now, I turn that same focused attention to understanding the structure of my own ruin. I didn't look for emotional solace. I looked for patterns. I started with our finances. Ethan was right. Everything of value was in his name. The house, the investment accounts, the cars. He had always explained it as a logical way to manage our complex finances, a way to protect us from liability. Now I saw it for what it was, a way to protect him from me. Every major asset was acquired just before our wedding or structured as a business holding. Ethan Cole, Esquire, had been planning his escape route since before he'd even said, "I do." Then I turned to Isabel. I scrolled back through years of her social media, cross-referencing her posts with Ethan's work calendar, which we used to share. A business trip to Chicago for him coincided with an impromptu girls' weekend for her. A legal conference in San Francisco for him, a gallery-hopping trip for her. It was all there, hidden in plain sight, a breadcrumb trail of deceit I had been too trusting to see. They hadn't just fallen in love. They had conducted a long-term, calculated campaign. The next morning, I didn't call a moving company. I called a name I'd found after hours of searching for the best divorce attorney in Auden Bay, a name that was always accompanied by words like formidable, strategic, and unflinching. Her name was Eleanor Vance. Eleanor Vance's office was on the 40th floor, with a view that seemed to encompass the entire city. She was in her late 50s, with silver hair cut in a sharp, elegant bob and eyes that missed nothing. She listened to my entire story without interruption, her expression unreadable. When I finished, I pushed Ethan's settlement offer across her desk. She glanced at it for no more than 10 seconds. "Mr. Cole's offer is an insult," she said, her voice calm and clear as a bell. "He said it was generous." "He's lying. Or, more accurately, he's leveraging your emotional distress against you, hoping you'll take the path of least resistance. In a marriage of this length, with your contributions to the household and the restoration of the marital home, you are entitled to a great deal more than this. The fact that he structured your assets this way suggests a clear pattern of financial concealment and intent to defraud." The legal terms were cold, but they were a balm to my raw emotions. They gave a name to the injustice. "He's been planning this," I said, the realization settling into my bones. "I can't speak to his emotional intentions, Miss Thompson, but I can speak to his financial actions. And they paint the picture of a man who was always preparing for this day." She leaned back in her chair. "The question is, what do you want?" "I want what's fair." Fair is a concept for philosophers. The courts deal in what is equitable and what can be proven. So I ask again, what do you want? I thought of Isabel's pitying smile, my mother's gentle dismissal, Ethan's weary impatience. I thought of them redrawing their perfect family, expecting me to simply fade out of the picture. "I want them to understand," I said, my voice gaining strength, "that I am not a rough draft to be crumpled up and thrown away." Eleanor Vance allowed herself a small, thin smile. "Now we're talking. Tell me more about your sister. Her job, her social circle, her reputation." I told her everything. About the gallery, the high-profile artists she represented, the way her career was built on an image of impeccable taste and social grace. "Interesting," Eleanor mused, making a note on a legal pad. "Reputation is a fragile asset, especially in a world as small and insular as the high-end art market." I left her office feeling different. The hollow ache was still there, but it was now overlaid with something else: purpose. I had spent my life illustrating structures built by other people. For the first time, I was about to design my own. The official divorce petition, filed by Eleanor's office, landed on Ethan's desk at Sterling and Croft 2 days later. It was delivered by a process server during a senior partners meeting. I knew this because Ethan called me within the hour, his voice no longer calm and reasonable, but a low snarl of fury. "Clara, what in God's name is this? Adultery? Intentional infliction of emotional distress? A full forensic accounting of all assets." "It's a divorce petition, Ethan," I said, my voice steady. "I thought that's what you wanted. We had an agreement. You had a proposal. I've decided to make a counteroffer." There was a long, charged silence. "You're making a monumental mistake. This is going to get ugly." "It's already ugly, Ethan. I've just decided to turn the lights on. I will not let you ruin my career over a fit of pique." "I'm not trying to ruin your career. I'm trying to secure my future. A future you and my sister tried to take from me." "Listen to me very carefully, Clara," he said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "If you proceed with this, I will bury you. I have resources you can't even imagine. You'll walk away with nothing." "Is that a threat, Ethan?" "It's a promise." I hung up, my hand trembling slightly, but my resolve hardening into steel. An hour later, Isabel was at my hotel room door. She wasn't wearing a mask of gentle concern anymore. Her face was tight with anger. "You have to stop this, Clara," she said, storming into the room. "Do you have any idea what you're doing? You're embarrassing the family." "I'm embarrassing the family? This insane lawsuit. You're accusing Ethan of fraud. You're accusing me of whatever it is your Barracuda lawyer cooked up. People at the firm are talking. People at my gallery are asking questions." "Good," I said. "Maybe they should be." Isabel stepped closer, her eyes flashing. "Clara, I'm trying to help you. If you push Ethan, he will destroy you. He's not the quiet man you think you know. In his world, they don't play fair. They play to win." "So do I said. The words surprised even me. Her expression shifted, the anger curdling into something venomous. "Fine. You want to play this way? Ethan isn't the only one with influence. I built my career on my reputation and my connections. I know journalists, critics, collectors. I can make sure that no one in the city ever commissions another one of your quaint little drawings again." I stared at her, my sister, threatening to destroy the one thing that was wholly mine, the one thing they hadn't touched. And in that moment, I saw her with perfect, painful clarity. She wasn't a dazzling star. She was a black hole, consuming the light of everyone around her to feed her own ambition. "Get out," I said quietly. "Clara, get out." After she left, I called Eleanor. "They're threatening me," I said, my voice shaking. "Excellent," Eleanor replied, unperturbed. "Record everything. Every call, every email, every text. They're making our case for us. A threatened person is a credible person. A guilty person is the one who makes threats." The first crack in their fortress came from an unexpected place. The senior partner at Sterling and Croft requested a meeting with Eleanor. Apparently, the firm was deeply concerned about the optics of a junior partner being embroiled in such a sordid, public divorce. The words "firm reputation" and "client confidence" were used. They wanted a swift, quiet resolution. The second crack came from Isabel's world. An influential arts blogger, known for her sharp commentary, published a blind item about a certain gallery director whose personal acquisitions are far more scandalous than her professional ones. The post didn't name names, but the details were specific enough. Two of Isabel's major artists, whose careers were built on a feminist ethos, suddenly requested meetings to reevaluate their representation. I asked Eleanor if she was behind it. "I am behind our legal filing, which is a public document," she said smoothly. "I can't control who reads public documents or what conclusions they draw from them." The third crack was a phone call from Ethan's mother. Mrs. Cole had always been polite but distant. Now, her voice was warm with a horrified sympathy. "Clara, dear, I just heard about Ethan and your sister. I am absolutely appalled. I want you to know this is not how I raised my son. His father would be ashamed." She paused. "I hope you fight for everything you deserve, my dear. Don't let him bully you." The pressure was mounting. Ethan and Isabel had wanted to control the narrative, to cast me as the quiet, amicable ex-wife who gracefully stepped aside. Instead, I had become the protagonist of a very different story, and they were quickly being cast as the villains. The final meeting took place back in the conference room at Sterling and Croft. This time, I wasn't alone. I sat beside Eleanor, across from Ethan and his lead attorney. Ethan looked haggard. The confident, composed man who had dismissed me so easily was gone. In his place was a man cornered. My client, Eleanor began, her voice echoing slightly in the silent room, is prepared to accept a settlement. She will take the house on Hemlock Lane, free and clear of the mortgage, which your client will pay off. She will also require a one-time payment of $500,000 for emotional distress and to rebuild her business, which your client and his paramour have actively threatened. Ethan's lawyer scoffed. That's preposterous. Is it? Eleanor countered, sliding a thin file across the table. Here are transcripts of your client's threatening phone call, and a sworn affidavit from my client detailing his sister-in-law's threats against her livelihood. We also have a very interesting timeline of your client's travel expenses, which seem to frequently coincide with Ms. Isabel Thompson's travel. I imagine the firm's ethics committee would find that fascinating. Not to mention the IRS. Ethan went pale. This is extortion, he whispered, looking at me. No, Ethan, I said, finding my voice. This is the bill. For my time, my work on the house, my trust, my heart. You put a price on my departure when you offered me $50,000. I've just adjusted it for inflation. I saw the fight go out of him. He had built his life on control and calculation, and he had completely miscalculated me. He had assessed me as a liability to be managed, not an opponent to be fought. It was a fatal error. He settled. He kept his job, barely, but the financial toll was immense, and his path to senior partner was indefinitely blocked. He had to sell the house on Hemlock Lane to pay the settlement. Our masterpiece, sold to strangers to pay for his betrayal. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new studio, a bright, airy loft in the city's arts district. The walls were covered in my work, architectural sketches, delicate botanical prints, commissions that were pouring in faster than I could complete them. My story, in a strange way, had become part of my brand. I was the woman who had refused to be erased. I learned that Ethan and Isabel had split up a few months after the settlement. The thrill of their secret affair, it turned out, did not survive the mundane reality of legal bills and professional disgrace. He had moved to a smaller firm. She had left Auden Bay after her gallery's board suggested she take an extended sabbatical. My mother and I were slowly, cautiously rebuilding our relationship. She visited my studio one afternoon, looking at my new work with a respect I'd never seen from her before. Your father always said you had a steel spine, she said quietly. I guess I just never looked closely enough to see it. I don't hate them anymore. Hate is a fire that consumes the person who holds it, and I am too busy building my new life to be consumed. But I haven't forgiven them. Forgiveness is for mistakes, for lapses in judgment. What they did was a campaign, a conscious and deliberate act of destruction. You don't forgive an avalanche. You simply learn to build on higher ground. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet and the only sound is the scratch of my pen on paper, I think about that woman who stood in the doorway of the study on Hemlock Lane, her world crumbling around her. I feel a great tenderness for her trusting heart and her quiet nature. She is not gone. She is the foundation upon which this new woman, stronger, wiser, and more vibrantly alive, was built. My new life isn't a grand, dramatic masterpiece. It's more like one of my illustrations, built line by careful line, grounded in a clear-eyed understanding of its own structure and filled, finally, with light. It is a life of my own design. And it is beautiful.